Hi, I'm Hamish Black, and this is Writing on Games. First off, hey, I'm back! After a couple of months of having basically no time whatsoever due to other things going on in my life, I see that a bunch of people enjoyed my Metal Gear Solid 5 video and chose to subscribe based on that. Thank you so much, it really means a lot to me and was a constant reminder of why I should make time to do this, even if it seems like I totally don't have the time at the moment. With all of that in mind, I've decided to return with an episode on a very hot topic just now, that being Fallout 4. I'll preface this by saying that all of this is just my opinion. If you disagree, that's totally cool, and encouraged. Discourse is a good thing. Let's begin, shall we? Fallout 4 is incredibly interesting in many ways. It was one of the most hyped games I've seen in a long time, with rumours circulating about its development and reveal for a number of years, and the actual reveal at E3 itself being one of my most prominent memories of the conference in recent times. The fervour surrounding this game has been absolutely palpable, and with good reason. Bethesda over the years have produced some of the most intriguing and enjoyable open world games since the genre's inception. As much as I'm not a huge fan of the generic fantasy aesthetic and tropes, their Elder Scrolls series leans into that and embraces it with a gusto that is hard not to find charming. Fallout, on the other hand, has always struck me as a masterwork of aesthetic design. The way it merges elements of retro-futuristic science fiction with 40s to 50s architecture and design philosophies, ultra-advanced technology with a DIY makeshift industrial flair, all topped off with a dash of McCarthy-era paranoia aligning perfectly with the tension of survival in the post-apocalypse. It blends these seemingly oxymoronic elements into a world more cohesive and recognisable than perhaps any other game universe to date. When you see a Fallout game, you recognise all these elements pilfered from other media and pop culture from various time periods, but it all comes together to make an instantly distinguishable Fallout game. In 2008, when I played Fallout 3, like many others I assume, my first experience with the series, this distinctly universal yet almost wholly singular aesthetic resonated with me in a way that, dare I say it, has yet to be matched. That said, that was back in 2008. And since the most recent iteration's release, it is safe to say that fan reaction has been mixed. Many people have criticised the game for its numerous and significant technical shortcomings, its comparatively mediocre quests and writing, but perhaps most importantly, its similarity, to a fault, to a game that was released 7 years ago. Now, these are things that to a certain extent I agree with, and I'll come on to a bit later. What I will say is that ultimately I did enjoy Fallout 4 a great deal, yet I would be lying if I said I wasn't left pretty disappointed by it in a number of ways. Many of these reasons tie into the general fan reaction that I have mentioned here. Most notably that I guess I, perhaps naively, expected something more from a game this long in development and a formula that, at this point, is so well trodden. After pondering it for a while, however, I came to the conclusion that perhaps it wasn't simply the fact that I had played this game several times before that left me underwhelmed. It was the fact that, in many ways, Bethesda hadn't quite managed to nail those previously explored elements as competently as they did in Fallout 3, or as Obsidian managed with New Vegas. In other words, it's not just that they have done exactly what they did before, it's that it's just not as effectively pulled off in Fallout 4. All the elements of a good Fallout game are there, but they just don't fit together as cohesively or have that same flair as they have done in the past. The way new features in particular are implemented only serves to highlight this issue. Take for instance the crafting and settlement building of Fallout 4. This feature, when touted at Bethesda's E3 presentation, excited many people as it played into the idea that was propagated as early as Fallout 3 in the form of mods and the like, that many people didn't want to just explore in this world, they wanted to create in it. The feature seems set to capitalise on a crucial element of post-apocalyptic survival as seen in many works of fiction on the matter. After everything is destroyed, how does one go about rebuilding it again? In some ways, the game is successful in taking this idea to its logical conclusion. The way the game rewards you with resources for scrapping old houses, cars and other pre-war remnants gives the system a real scrappy DIY feel as you recycle anything and everything in order to create rudimentary living spaces and amenities that are far more suited to life in the wasteland. Mechanically, the system is potentially sound. This, however, highlights what might be my main problem with Fallout 4. The idea that these elements lack the thematic cohesion that they might have had were they present in previous Fallout titles. As I just mentioned, there are elements of the crafting system that do tie in with the universe and are effective as a result, but they are rendered somewhat meaningless by the game's reticence to place any real weight on them. Yes, these systems involve the dynamic of the post-apocalypse in a way that the games perhaps haven't done before, but why am I being asked to build these settlements? The idea of destroying your hometown of Sanctuary in order to rebuild it as something more functional could have been incredibly meaningful thematically, but this is never presented to the player, partially due to the incredibly ineffective tutorialization of the feature, and partially because we are never really given any time to feel like this place is any different from the many other meaningless settlements we're told to liberate. Perhaps this could have been alleviated by having you build up just the one settlement as opposed to taking over the wasteland, as it were. As it stands, the game feels like it doesn't know if it wants to be a game about survival or empire building. The same kind of issue is exemplified with the power armor in this game. Almost immediately you are presented with an old Brotherhood power armor suit and are propelled into a battle with a Deathclaw. For my money, the idea of power armor in previous games was always something that was super exciting to build up to, and it lent the Brotherhood a sense of intrigue and power that they might not have had if the player was merely able to wear power armor from the outset as they are able to here. Now, this may be due to my lack of skill to play the game well, but the Deathclaw in previous games felt absolutely insurmountable to me at first. But building myself up in terms of weapons and skills allowed me to come back and feel incredibly satisfied overcoming an obstacle that was once so impossible. In Fallout 4, like I say, you are given power armor and a minigun almost instantly, and are forced to take part in a trivial Deathclaw fight. This moment, as a result, is completely robbed of any gravity. These issues with pacing bring to light my main issue with the game, the lack of cohesion between the gameplay elements both old and new. This isn't simply a retreading of old ground, it's a less effective way of doing things. Systems seem merely placed atop other systems and they all feel disparate as a result. The systems are there mechanically, but the aesthetic and thematic cohesion I so adored about the older games has been greatly reduced. Arguably this is largely down to the game's writing, which by and large is a major step down from previous installments, which is in itself largely down to the game's new dialogue system, for example. In previous Fallout games, the player character lacked a voice of any kind. The characters you spoke to would say their lines and then you would be presented with a list of potential responses, each of which you could see in full. I'm not sure whether it was simply a result of the introduction of voice actors to the player characters, or merely to reduce the intrusiveness of the user interface, but now these dialogue options are limited to 4, and instead of providing you a full account of what your character will say, gives the player a summarised version, often as short as one word, merely describing the tone in which your character will apparently respond. This causes many problems. For one, this limits player choice, not only from a numerical standpoint, although certainly from that too. The fact that the player could see exactly what they would say in previous games meant that they could parse the tone of the phrase for themselves. The nuances of the language came through as the player was presented with every part of the response up front. In Fallout 4, however, the dialogue becomes this abstracted meta-puzzle of what summary here might fit in the best with the way I'm trying to roleplay my character. It simply creates meaningless guesswork for the player, as often the game does not accurately represent the tone with which the player character will respond. When presented with options like forceful, for example, the player is not immediately aware if they are going to merely assert themselves in a conversation or start shouting manically, for example. Then there's the sarcastic option. Oh, the dreaded sarcastic option. This seems to present itself at almost every opportunity it can, and often the player is presented with no information whatsoever as to what words the sarcastic option entails, whether they be charmingly sarcastic or just plain aggressive, let alone the idea that some of the questions being asked of the player really don't warrant a sarcastic response. Why would someone respond sarcastically to a question regarding the people who took your son? My point is not that this option should be removed from the game, or that the dialogue should be made plainer in order that the player can better understand what it is they're saying, although I do think largely it has been due to the inclusion of voice actors to the player character. I'm simply saying that this way of presenting dialogue options to the player is incredibly clunky when compared to previous games. Like I say, it gives the player less options to work with. Before, the tone of the phrase would be apparent from the wording used in the phrase. The game would respect the player's intelligence to the point that it would trust you to be able to parse the tone without the game having to explicitly say what emotion was being conveyed. Here, not only does the player not get that respect, but the outcome just isn't as effective as a result. This isn't even to mention the myriad technical issues with the game. Obviously, with a game of this scope, some technical hitches are to be expected, but the fact is that this game plays exactly like Fallout 3 in New Vegas. That is to say, the game feels like it might fall apart at any minute. Entire quests hang in the balance as scripting struggles to keep up with the millions of potential variables on every screen. The AI, both enemy and friendly, is pure jank, and even on my PC the game ran like total shit. I'm not sure if this was a problem with the fact that I run an AMD card, an R9 290 to be exact, but even after taking the settings down to medium, the game still suffered from regular stutter and significant frame rate drops. In 2008, this was more than acceptable. Graphics alone do not a compelling game make. But in 2015, that shit becomes harder and harder to forgive, especially in a year where games as fully realised and polished as Metal Gear Solid 5 and The Witcher 3 have been released. Obviously, those games don't allow you to pick up and move almost everything in the environment, and therefore reduce their variables at any given moment exponentially. But if it came to it, I'd rather have a streamlined, focused experience if it meant that I wouldn't have to constantly worry that my game was going to crash. Ultimately though, I did have fun playing this game. The story, despite its unsatisfactory ending and general lack of urgency, goes to some interesting places, especially when the inner workings of the Institute are explored more fully. The aesthetic design I so loved in previous Fallout games is still present and makes wandering the wasteland one more time as joyous as it ever was. Diamond City, for example, feels like a bustling metropolis that, despite its makeshift settlements and ramshackle businesses, at the same time feels like it wouldn't be out of place in, for example, Blade Runner. The seedy neon underbelly feeling just barely masked by a comparatively industrial and flourishing city. The game also embraces the pre-war, post-war duality in a way that it hasn't done before, and despite poor writing in general, the atmosphere feels stronger for it. Having to explain, for example, the actual rules of baseball to someone who seems to be an expert but lacks the pre-war understanding of what the game actually entails is pretty hilarious. With all of that in mind, it would be easy to say that this is more Fallout, and therefore any technical shortcomings or slight deviancies from the thematic elements of the game could be ignored. However, in this writer's eyes, it is not simply a case of going back to what made the old games great. There are many ways in which this game fails to live up to the legacy of its predecessors. And when the game has so much potential, it's a shame that ultimately I was left with a subtle yet palpable sense of disappointment. Perhaps, in this instance, war has changed. So yeah, that concludes my review and analysis of the gameplay systems present in Fallout 4. I know this may have seemed pretty negative overall, but like I say, there are compelling reasons to play this game. I guess I just expected a bit more from Bethesda at this stage. This is totally just my opinion, remember. I'd be very interested to hear what other people thought of it, as the reception I've seen from a fan's perspective has seemed incredibly divided. Perhaps almost as much as Metal Gear Solid 5? Actually, nah, let's not go crazy here. Have you seen the comments on my other videos? Anyway, let me know what you think below, and if you feel like subscribing, I'd greatly appreciate it. To those new subscribers who came here off the back of my Metal Gear Solid videos, it's crazy to me that anyone would give a shit about what I have to say regarding games, so the fact that what I'm saying seems to have resonated so positively with so many of you is pretty invigorating. Anyway, hopefully the gap between this episode and the next one won't be as long as it has been, as I'm a little less busy now. I've got a lot of ideas that I'm ready to explore, and hey, I'd love to have you along for the ride. Thanks again for watching. I'm Hamish Black, and this has been Writing on Games. I'll see you next time.